Hello, welcome. So happy to be here with you today. I feel like so much has happened because last time I spoke to you, I was just about to go off to Dublin for the Triker event. And if you didn't listen to that episode, I was saying that I was going to go and do this fitness event. It's a bit like High Rocks, if you've heard of High Rocks. And I was doing it with Claire from Fit Positive, who I'd never met before. And I wasn't sure if we were even going to be compatible as a doubles team, but it was great. I really, really enjoyed it. We got on really well, and actually we were both similarly matched with the running, and then Claire was better than me at some of the exercises and I was stronger at some of the others, and I realized that actually we can use that to our advantage when we do it again, which we are doing it again. We're going to do it in July, so that was great. But I also said in that episode that that weekend was not going to be focused on fat loss, because I've been updating you on my fat loss journey at the start of these episodes, and it wasn't focused on fat loss, and I ate very differently than I have been recently, and I wasn't worried about that. I don't think that I did enough to undo anything. I was still very mindful of the choices I was making, and I say mindful, I ate and drank very differently. But when we were sitting down, for example, having pizza one evening, I didn't feel like I had to finish it because it was there. I don't have that anymore. I'm definitely aware of the sunk cost fallacy. I bought that pizza. Eating all of it isn't going to change anything. It's not going to help any situation. So I tried not to overeat. But I did feel very different for how I ate and drank that weekend, because it definitely impacted my sleep. So on the Friday, we had the event, and then I did have some alcohol. I don't normally drink very much, but I had a Guinness because I was in Dublin. I feel like you have to have a Guinness, and I don't like it here, but I did like it there. Just side note. And then I had a cocktail with Claire and wine with dinner, a glass of wine with dinner. And I didn't sleep very well. I felt really hot. And I think it was a combination of the exercise in the morning, the eating slightly different foods because we went out for dinner in the evening, and a little bit more alcohol. And that impacted my sleep. And then we went into the next day. We were very active. We still went for walks and so on. But I definitely felt like I was eating a little bit more and recovering a little bit less. So the main focus was coming back after the weekend and getting back into a routine, which I 100% did. I focused on having those meals planned, making it easier. But the other thing is that I'm due on today, and I have definitely noticed some changes to my cycle as I've got older. And I'm in that weird stage where I'm not technically perimenopausal because I have a regular cycle, but I am noticing things that are happening in this week before my period every month now. And that is that my sleep is so much worse than it used to be. And the other thing that I'm noticing is I have this lower back issue, and it's there often now, but it's not like debilitating. It's never to the point where I kind of can't do anything, but it definitely flares up in that week before my cycle. So it's really, to me, a little sign that inflammation's just a little bit higher at this point in time. But the reassuring thing is that as soon as the cycle comes, as soon as I start my period, everything feels easier again. So I'm feeling a bit tired today, but I'm going to do this episode because it's something that I feel quite strongly about. And I think everyone will benefit from it, as well as my members. But I wanted to come and talk to you about that. And then when it comes to the scale weight, obviously it will fluctuate quite a lot with what I've been doing. So I weighed the day before I went, had a new lowest on the scales that day. I did weigh a couple of days after coming back, and understandably it had spiked up, and I'm okay with that. But I've actually given myself a few days off the scales because I just know that it's going to be sitting higher, and I know that I can trust the process because I'm doing the same things that I would normally do. I know that it will come down. This is a pattern we see again and again. But I do think that it highlights why people might give up on fat loss. Like, this is partly what I was thinking about when I was putting today's episode together. I'll get a lot of messages from women who will say that they feel like they're trying everything, doing the same things that they were doing before, eating healthily, and they're just not losing weight. And I wondered if they're focusing too much on the weight and not body fat. Because if I was weighing weekly, even if I hit that scales on a high day, I could potentially feel like I was never losing any weight at the moment. I am. And I know because I've been weighing way more often. And also I've done other measurements as well. So I know that things are changing, but I could see how easy it is to feel like something's not working because of the fact that our weight when we're hormonal is going to fluctuate perhaps a lot more than normal. So it could be that we're just not giving it enough time. And that is going to lead in quite nicely to what I want to talk about today, because I know that a lot of people, a lot of you, a lot of my members and so on have been a little bit busier over Easter, myself included. We've had kind of lots going on, and the boys have been off school and different things have been happening. I've had a lot more going away at the weekend. Like, we quite often have at least a couple of quiet weekends a month, but recently it's just felt like it's been really busy. And I think when it's been like that, you can feel like you're ready to get a bit more focused on pushing a little bit more for fat loss, if that is your goal. And like, when I say pushing a little bit more, I mean doing it in a way that works with life. Those of you that have listened to me or followed me for a while will know that I am very much of the opinion that fat loss needs to work with life. And we don't need one of those all or nothing plans at this stage. We've done those before. We don't need it again. You see, the danger with those kind of 6-8 week programs that are very prescriptive, that you feel like you have to go all in on, you might think, well, actually, that is definitely going to get me the results I want. But what can happen if we do it that way is that we go all in, we do it for a bit, and then it doesn't work out. We can't manage it. We feel like we've failed, so we give up. We blame ourselves, our lack of motivation, or thinking that there's something wrong with us, or we're not cut out for this. And that's it. And we feel fed up. Or we go all in. We think, I just need to manage this for 6 to 8 weeks or however long it is. And we get to the end, we're super relieved. Maybe we've made great progress. You likely have if you stuck to all of the points there. And then we just go back to doing what we were doing before. And then we gain the weight again, sometimes more weight again. So that's not what I mean when I say reset. I mean a focused period of time. And actually, I was speaking to my members about what I'm planning for May and June. And I said, is there anything you want to add? I'm going to be recording a podcast on this tomorrow. And one of them, who's been with me for a while, she's made such incredible progress. Like, she's lost like 27 kilograms in total, but it's more than that as well. You know, she's so much stronger, she's fitter, she feels better, she's got more energy, those types of things. But her thing that she said is, I just think it's important to remember that it's not a complete overhaul of your life. And I thought, yes, that's it. It really isn't. And for the members inside the app, she was like talking about minimums, which we'll talk about in a moment because I'll share that with you. But she was like, often your push goals aren't going to be much more than your minimums, which is also worth remembering. A reset really is just a bit more focus, a focused period of time where we're just a bit more intentional. And there is a way of doing this so that it feels manageable and you make great progress, because that is key here, right? You will still make incredible progress over that 2-month period. It's just making sure that we approach it from the beginning in the right way. I think it's important I make it clear that, yes, it's not starting from scratch. It's not a punishment for the fact that Easter might have been a little bit busier. You might have eaten a bit more. You're not trying to undo all of that as quickly as possible. You're not punishing yourself for the fact things haven't been quite as you planned. And of course, it's definitely not cutting out everything and going all in, because we want it to fit with life for the whole of the 2 months. And the reason a reset can work is partly down to that fresh start feeling. You know, I've spoken in podcasts before about how at the start of the month, the start of a year, your birthday, or when you sign up to a new program, you get this like huge feeling of motivation. Like, yes, this time it's going to be it. I'm going to manage. And we can use that to our advantage. The issues arise when we are only relying on that fresh start motivation and we've got no structure to keep us going, when inevitably life does show up, things get busier and our motivation does dip a little. We need some structure and things in place to help with that. But we can utilize that fresh start mentality. So starting at the beginning of May, at the beginning of a month, with this clear intention, when the kids are back in school and it's not quite the summer, you know, we've still got a bit of time, that can be hugely motivating for a lot of you. And I think we can play on this. I think something that's often missed is that it's not the lack of motivation that stops us from continuing. It can be that daily negotiation. If we think about chimp paradox, you know, the chimp in our human brain and so on, when we're feeling really tired and so on, the chimp kind of takes over. And that daily negotiation can be exhausting. That low level conversation about whether you're doing enough, whether it's actually working, was today actually a write-off, should you really bother? And I think a reset can take a lot of that off the table because you're not deciding every day, it's decided already. And there's also something worth mentioning about the 2-month period in particular, because research on habit formation puts the average time it takes for a new behavior to feel automatic at around 59 to 66 days. Now, it does depend on what the habit is and your history and past with that, how you're approaching that habit. But 2 months isn't just a round number. It can genuinely be a window of time where things that you're doing consistently start to feel just like normal, just something you do now. So it isn't just about the results at the end of the 2 months, but that the habits have also had enough time to bed in and start to feel like they're working for you. And the other thing that research shows us is that having that accountability, whether that's telling the people around you, being part of a group, making it public in some way, that really does help with follow through and consistency. And I do notice this inside the membership, those members that are more active on the group, that are sharing their wins, that are sharing their struggles and genuinely more active, that are asking for help, those are the ones that then tend to be more consistent over time, which is funny because I used to be somebody that would sit quietly in the background. And I'm not saying that those people don't make progress, but I do definitely see a pattern more often that it's the ones that are happy to share their struggles and their wins that are doing so incredibly well. And that's why we're making it the group challenge in May. Now, obviously, I'm talking here about why a reset can work, but there is a bit of a trap to a reset that you could easily fall into if you're not careful, because that fresh start, high motivation feeling can also make us do something that maybe is less helpful. We can decide that we're just going to pile everything on, more workouts, stricter eating, cutting out everything that doesn't feel like it's perfect, feeling like cake occasionally is going to sort of undo everything. So no cake, no snacks, no carbs, whatever, because you are already feeling motivated and ready. And it feels that at that point that is what commitment looks like. But then what does tend to happen a couple of weeks down the line when you really are living your life as normal and you're feeling tired, maybe hormonal. And then because you've set that bar so high, it feels like there's no flexibility built in at all. And the whole thing then starts to feel impossible. And then you stop and then you feel like you failed again. This is exactly what I was talking about that can happen in those plans. And that is not what I'd want for any of you. We know from research that the rigid approaches are linked to higher rates of giving up, higher rates of weight regain. And I have spoken about this in previous episodes, but it is an important thing to understand. The more rigid we are, the harder it will be to sustain. And it's not because you're weak, but because you're human. So the risk here isn't about the focus, it's the perfectionism creeping in alongside that. So that's why we're going to focus on the method and the approach, because the method already has the answers built into it. Instead of adding in more and more, hoping that motivation holds out, we're going to do something different. We get clear, we get specific, and we give ourselves a structure that can actually bend without breaking. So before we go into the method and the actual approach you can take on your reset, I want to briefly talk about some of the things I do notice again and again when I look at the women who are making the most progress, the ones who actually keep going. And I don't just mean for 2 months here, I mean beyond that, because there are patterns and they are worth paying attention to. And I think the biggest one that I notice is that they pay attention, they reflect. They don't just keep pushing and hoping for the best and not just adding on more and more. They really do look at what's working and what isn't. And then they adjust. They're not expecting things to be the same every single day. And we know from research that this self-monitoring and reflecting on what you're doing are strongly linked with better fat loss outcomes. So it's not about obsessing, it's just paying a bit more attention. And they're also learning from the patterns that they see. They're not taking it as an insult. They're not telling themselves or beating themselves up and saying that they failed. And it is something I see that comes up a lot. Someone will tell me that they're struggling with emotional eating in the evenings, for example. But then when we actually look at what's going on, it's often not emotional eating at all. It's that they're skipping meals during the day because work has been super busy. They feel super stressed and they're under eating or they're not getting enough nutrients in those meals. And what feels like a character flaw is actually just hunger or a lack of structure. And when you can see that, it stops feeling personal and starts feeling like, oh, this is something I can control and do something about. You're no longer just relying on willpower and motivation. These women also aren't just focused on the scales either. They're noticing changes in their energy, their strength, how their clothes are fitting, how their sleep is. And research backs this up too. When we focus on the behaviors, the things that are actually doing day to day, rather than just that outcome, we tend to see better progress and we actually feel better while we're doing it. These women aren't expecting perfection day in and day out. They're not giving up because they've had a bad day or treat one slip as a reason to write off the whole week. And we know that the more rigid approaches are much harder to sustain long term. So the all or nothing mentality looks like commitment from the outside when you see someone doing it for that short period of time, but it's one of the biggest reasons that you'll stop. These women have usually got some kind of routine going on. They're not thinking from scratch every single day about what they're going to do. They have a little process and routine that they're just repeating. And the more consistently that we repeat a behavior, the more automatic it becomes over time. Sometimes it gets to the point where we don't even realize, we might even stop seeing it as a win, which is not so good because it is just so more automatic. And this is one of the reasons I want you to think about the reset, not as a challenge you've got to complete and finish and end, but as a window of time where you're building the routines that can just become normal. And the other thing that I noticed that these women aren't doing it alone. They are happy to ask for help. They're staying connected to people who are doing the same thing. And research shows that doing these things as part of a group, or even just saying your goal out loud, making it public, it can genuinely improve your follow through and your consistency. There's something about accountability that changes how we show up. But probably the most important thing is that they're realistic. They know what fits their life right now and not the life that they wish they had or the one that they hope is suddenly going to turn up at some point during this plan. But they plan around that life, the life they know they have. So when you look at all of this together, it is not about being perfect. It's not about extreme effort. It's not about doing more and more and more. It's about paying attention, adjusting, and then staying consistent. And the only way you can actually do that is if you stop and look on what's been going on. And that brings me up to the first part of the reset, which is reflection. Because before we reset anything, we really do need to understand what's been making this harder, because it's unlikely that you've just decided you've got this goal now. It's likely you've tried before and things have been a little bit harder, maybe over Easter or longer term. But what we don't want is just to repeat that same pattern of doing something, it not working, us giving up. This isn't about looking and thinking about what's wrong with you, of course. It's not about finding fault and then adding to the pile of things that you feel like you're bad at. This is about understanding what's been getting in the way, because there will be something that has been making it harder. There normally is. If I think about my own fat loss journey at the moment, I've realized that yes, my sleep is not as great at this time in the month. But actually, when I think about some of the goals I set with my progress goals, one of them was to put my phone on charge at 8:30 each evening. But bear in mind that I'm getting up before 6 every morning. I probably actually need to put my phone on charge even earlier than that if I want to wind down properly for sleep. So maybe part of the sleep issue is the fact that I am still a little bit switched on and wired when I'm going down to bed in the evening. So it is about taking that time and seeing what we can control. So maybe your sleep has been a little bit off, or maybe your meals have felt a little bit more inconsistent or reactive, or you've just been grabbing whatever's around rather than planning anything. Or maybe your movement is a little bit less now, or the evenings are feeling tricky when snacking is kicking in. Perhaps you're struggling to do the workouts at this time you say you're going to do them because motivation is a little bit lower. What we do know is that when we're tired, stressed, and making lots of decisions, it is so much harder to follow through on what we intend to do. And that is not a mindset problem that you've got alone. It's just biology. It's decision fatigue, and it's a real thing. When we're running low, the things that take effort are the first that are going to go. And then I just want to come back to that evening snacking that I mentioned, because that is something you might be noticing. It's so common for evening snacking to kick in. But when we take a moment to look at the day, have you been finding that you're not eating quite enough during the day and not getting enough nutrients during the day? See if there are any patterns to it, because again, it's not that you are a failure. It's likely that there is a reason and a cause for it. And if the cause is habit, then we can look at what you could put in to help with that habit. You see, if you don't understand why it's been hard in the first place, then the danger is that you're just going to repeat that pattern. But if you've even taken 5-10 minutes to look at actually what's been going on, you can then make a plan for it. You can build your minimums around the reality of your life rather than just the version that you wish you had. And then once you've got that clarity, that is where the reset becomes really actually very useful. And this can then inform our progress-based goals, which is the first pillar inside the method. So now we get into the actual approach itself. And this is where we start with our progress goals. And those progress goals are going to be so much easier to set yourself because of the fact you've just taken that time to reflect on what has and hasn't been working. Now, a progress goal, for those that don't know, I call them progress goals, but they are you looking at the actions that you will be focusing on doing in order to reach that outcome. We don't want to be focused only on the outcome. And the good thing about setting progress-based goals is we can celebrate the fact that we are consistently doing what we said we could do. And there's two ends of this, right? We look at movement, nutrition, mindset, and recovery, but in each one, we're looking at our push goals, but also we're looking at the minimum, the floor, the smallest thing we can do in each area. And that can just be one thing in each area, but they really do form the foundation of that reset. And I will go into the individual areas, the movement, nutrition, and mindset and recovery in just a moment, because those are the things that are actually going to make a difference to you achieving your goal. But your progress-based goals are actually looking at what is realistic in each of those areas. And I can give you, and I will guide you 100% on what is optimal. You know, what is the optimal thing that you can do that will mean that you achieve fat loss, for example. But if you know yourself very well and you have been struggling again and again and again with those same things, then we need to have a plan for when life inevitably does get in the way, and we need to have those options there. But the thing is, during this reset, and this is something I'm going to be focusing on with my members, is quite often we will fall back on the minimums when life has been busy, when it's more stressful, when there's been more going on. And Easter has been a time where that may well be the case because kids are home from school and so on, and you're just busier. But what would be good for this May, June time is to have us pushing for those optimal goals more often than not. So we still have those minimums there that will keep us going when life is very busy, that we are completely committed to. But this time, we're really going to be making sure we're focused on being at the optimal end of our goals as much as possible. Really, those minimums are just there for those super crazy, busy, unpredictable, hormonal days that just seem to go completely skew. You can think of them as a safety net, really, but it stops us being all or nothing. It stops us completely giving up. And that is the main point. It also helps us bring that clarity to the whole process as well. And it gives us something to regularly reflect on as we're going ahead. You've got that middle ground now. You know what that looks like. And this really is how we make it work with life. It would be very unrealistic for us to expect everything to look the same every single day. That's one of the reasons I don't use a set single calorie target, which I'll talk about in a moment. But if we're thinking about those areas that you've noticed that have been a bit more tricky recently, the things that have been making it harder, maybe you've not been able to get to the gym, or you've not been doing your workouts. If you do your workouts at home, you've not been managing them in quite the same way. You could then have a minimum that is, if I can't do my full workout, I will do this instead. And that might be just doing one round of that same workout. It might be going for a walk. But research will often call this implementation intentions. And that's basically deciding in advance what you'll do when things don't go to plan. And it shows that it makes such a significant difference to whether people actually follow through. And the reason's because you're not having to make that decision in the moment. Go back to decision fatigue. We've got so many decisions that we're already making day to day. And it's so easy to get tired and overwhelmed. And when we've already decided that if we can't do a full workout, we still need to do 5 minutes of movement, then we've got a plan. We've got a backup plan there. We keep that habit alive. So if I don't have time for my hour in the gym, I would likely do a shorter version of that same workout. It's not the things that you necessarily aim for. but they're there to support you when needed. But the important thing is to decide it now, to write it down, to know that those are the things you want to do and that that is your minimum. So think about this, as we're going through, think about what you would like to be able to do in each area, what you're going to push for, what should be realistic on those days that are a bit easier, but then also think about the if you can't do that, what's one thing that you can do, because that will help you with your consistency. And we are going to go into the nutrition, the movement, and the mindset and recovery separately. So I don't want you to feel like you've got to write it all down now, but have that in your mind as we're going through the rest of the method. Actually, there's something I nearly forgot to cover with you. I'm going to briefly cover it with you here, because we do need to think about how we're going to measure our progress. And I'm always a bit wary about this, but I do think there's part of our brain that if we take some physical measurements in some description, there's a switch that kind of goes and we're like, okay, I know what I'm doing. I'm ready for this. And obviously I spoke about our relationship with the scales and how the scales can fluctuate so wildly. It might be that you do weigh yourself at the beginning. You might weigh yourself daily so that you get used to those fluctuations. Or you might be somebody who normally weighs in stone and pound or pounds and decides to weigh in kilograms and then not look at it again until the 2 months is over, just so you can focus on the actions and not the outcome. Or it might be that you get somebody else to look at the number, or you've got one of those fancy scales that automatically inputs it and you just don't look at it. Whatever. But there are other ways of measuring progress. Of course, we're going to be measuring progress along the way through how we feel, our energy, our strength, and so on, those types of things. But because I know how easy it is to beat yourself up and not see the progress you're making, it can be very beneficial to have a little bit of data there as well. So before I started my fat loss phase, I did get on the scales, and you can do that daily, or you can do that monthly, or even just at the end of the 2 months. But I also took some measurements and I took some pictures. I know that pictures aren't lovely, but they just help you see that progress, because if you're looking in the mirror every day, then you're not going to see it. But another way of doing this is if you've got a pair of shorts that feel a little bit too tight, put them on at the beginning, put them on in a month's time, put them on in 8 weeks' time, see the difference that's made. But whatever method that you choose at the beginning, I really want you to reframe that the most important measure isn't the number on the scales. It's going to be your consistency. Are you consistently doing what you said you'd do? Are you aiming for those optimals more often than not, and then falling back on your minimums if you can't? Because that is going to be the data that is most important and the thing that you want to be reflecting on the most. Because if you're consistent with those things, then the physical results will absolutely happen. Now, I talk a lot about the gap and the gain. The gap is how far you've still got to go, and the gain is what you're already doing well. And most people spend a lot of their time focused on the gap, which is focused on that outcome. It's where you're not yet. But during the reset, I really want my members to be measuring the gain, to think about their progress they've made. So thinking about where they started, to think about that consistency, and to be reflecting backwards, not constantly reflecting on where they're not yet, because that's not so motivating. So now I want to go through each area of the method and then what it might look like in the reset in practice. So for each one, I'm going to give you what I would suggest as optimal, and then some thoughts on what your minimum might look like in this area, the one thing that will make it easier to do. So for nutrition, the optimal that I will be pointing my members towards is spending as much time as they can at the lower end of their calorie range. Even if they're not tracking their calories, planning their meals so that they're aware of that. Not every single day is going to be the same, so we need to be realistic here, but the majority of the time, if you're aiming at the bottom of your calorie range, then that's going to be fantastic. Now, if you don't know what a calorie range is, I'll briefly explain it here. I give my members a calorie range, and actually I've got a calorie range calculator that I will put a link to in my show notes so that you can all get it. But a calorie range is where you have the lower end of the range, which is optimal for fat loss, and the upper end of the range is pretty much maintenance, or where we think maintenance would be. Now, anywhere in that range is basically a deficit. But if you're spending more time at the top of your range, you're either going to be at maintenance or you're going to be losing very, very slowly. But even if you're averaging the middle of that range over a course of the week, you will still be in a deficit and you're still going to be making great. But the thing that I'd want you to avoid is aiming for the middle often, all the time, and then occasionally drifting higher, maybe a little bit over, and then you don't see much movement with regards to fat loss. So the aim would be to go to the lower as much as you can, and then hit the middle on average, accepting that some weekends away will happen and so on. And that's fine. You're still going to be noticing the progress over this time. And then alongside the calorie range is also focusing on getting enough protein and fiber. Protein with every meal, aiming to get fiber in each meal if you can as well, because when those two things are there, the fullness is definitely going to be easier to manage. Hunger is going to be easier to handle, and that's going to mean that you're far less likely to reach for those snacks reactively later in the day. Protein and fiber support satiety, which makes staying in your range a lot less of a battle. Now, I know that getting protein and fiber into each meal can feel like a big ask, especially if that's not where you're starting at right now. So think about it in steps, really. If meals don't currently have much protein in them, then I'd start there first and then look at adding fiber alongside it. And with fiber, it doesn't necessarily all have to come from the meal itself. I had a meal recently and it had about 5 grams of fiber in it, which isn't loads when we're aiming for around 30 grams per day. But I had a pear for my pudding and that added around 6 grams of fiber. So suddenly that meal has got around 10 grams of fiber in it. You know, berries, fruit alongside your meals, these all count, they all add up. So just think about fiber across the whole day rather than putting pressure on every single meal. However, it might be that your optimal is getting fiber at each meal, but have a think about, to begin with, getting fiber throughout the day. Now, your minimum for nutrition might be a high protein breakfast as your kind of non-negotiable. Whatever else is going on, you're like, that's it. I'm always going to have plenty of protein at breakfast. And the thing that makes all of this easier is going to be planning ahead. And I don't mean this elaborate meal plan. I just mean not winging it every day, trying to not be reactive with your choices. So it might be you think about your week in advance, or you think about it the night before. Think about what's coming up, what can make it harder. Is there anything that you can get ready ahead to make that easier? Or even just making those decisions before that busy day, which might be sometimes planning where you're going to drop in and get your lunch. Oh, I'm going to go and get that Marks and Spencer's potato and salmon salad, rather than panicking when I'm hungry and ending up just getting a Greg's. That's just an example. So it might be that your focus there around nutrition is going to be thinking about food the evening before every night, or it might be doing a bit of prep on a Sunday, or planning my meals on a Sunday. You'll know what's more likely to work for you, but think about how it's going to be easier to stay at the lower end of your calorie range. What's going to make it easier to get that protein and that fiber in your day as well. So think about those things like the night before or over the week. I find it really helpful to have a few go-to meals. These go-to meals are things that I know that I can have when things are busier. So I have this tuna meal that we have with pasta that I actually did share on Instagram recently. When the kids were little, we used to call it tuna pony because we used to make it with mascarpone, and now I make it with cream cheese. But tuna pony is something that I've always got the bits for in the cupboard normally. You've got the cans of tuna, so I'm not having to defrost anything. And then some chopped tomatoes, herbs, frozen broccoli is what I use in there as well. So it really does become something that I can have as like oh, I've got those things in. And then with breakfast, I tend to have similar things on repeat. So at the moment, I'm in a real overnight oats phase. It will change at some point. I kind of go through seasons with my food. But at the moment, I'm prepping 4 days of overnight oats on a Sunday. And then on the other days, if I haven't got something prepped, I have a fallback option. I've got scrambled oats, which is so easy. And then I can have it with 0% Greek yogurt and berries. And that is something I can just do quickly, bish, bash, bosh. So I've got that backup plan. And this is what you need to think about. You know what your optimals are. How can you make it easier? What can be your minimum? And we need to do the same for movement. And with my members, I'm kind of giving 2 options for movement as optimal during this reset. And you can take this on in whatever way you think. So you've got to think about where you're currently starting at. What have you been struggling with? Because option 1 is going to be looking at doing 3 strength training sessions a week, and they don't need to be long. We're thinking here 30-minute sessions done consistently, and that's going to be far better than planning longer ones that you never manage. And if you're looking at those strength sessions per week and you're thinking, oh yeah, I've struggled with consistency on those in the past, one option you could have as your minimum is doing just one round of those exercises. You're like, oh, I'm going to go in, I'm just going to do that one instead of 3 or 4, just whilst you're building that habit. That is still incredible. In fact, even if you were managing that consistently over the 2 months where you've been doing nothing before, that would still be incredible progress for you. But you can be building up, you see. But it goes back to that if and then. If I can't do a full workout, I'll do one round. If I can't do a gym workout, if you wanted to do a gym workout, I'll do a home one instead. The other option I'm giving my members is PJ workouts. And these are aiming for 5 days a week as an optimal. And they're just 5 to 10 minutes of movement, very simple, ideally in the morning. And actually for members, I've been doing these live every weekday morning at 6:30. And what we've noticed is, you know, the accountability is there, but also the ripple effect from these is real. So either shorter and more often, or you can aim for the longer workouts, but just do one round if you need to. It really comes down to picking the one that is realistic for how life looks right now. And actually those PJ workouts can be a great backup plan for if you're not doing a full workout as well. If I'm not going to do a full workout, I'll do a PJ workout. But alongside these structured sessions, your movement is also going to matter. So steps and general activity throughout the day. Research consistently shows that the activity that we do outside of those structured workouts does play a significant role in our overall energy balance. So if your steps are currently sitting quite low, then this is a good opportunity to just push them up a little bit, not dramatically, but gradually from where you are right now. So if you're averaging, for example, 4,000 steps a day, see if you can start averaging 5,000 to begin with. If you're aiming at the moment closer to 7,000, see if you can push it up to 8,000. Make your goal increasing it a little bit from where you are. And your minimum in that area could be not to drop below what you were averaging before. And then you push, of course, where you can, because it does make a difference. But I do want to flag here because, yes, it does impact energy balance. More movement can definitely help, but cardio or more cardio is not always the answer during a fat loss phase. I know it feels like it should be, but what we see happening again and again and again is that people just add more cardio on top of everything else, and then they're not recovering. They're more tired, they're hungrier because of the increased activity in that way. And then adherence to everything else just gets so much harder. So sometimes people will end up eating back more than they've even burned from that actual exercise. And I also think it can impact our relationship with the movement itself. We start feeling like we're doing it for fat loss. We're not doing it anymore because it's something that we really enjoy, let alone it can impact our relationship with food. You know, we eat something and then we feel like we want to go and run it off. So really we want to be supporting fat loss through the movement that we are doing anyway. Like I know that in my fat loss phase, actually movement was something I didn't really change. I run because it makes me feel good, but I'm not running more to help with fat loss. I'm keeping things the same for that. I know that if I ran more or tried to increase my cardio activity, there is a strong chance that my recovery would be harder. And also, I know from experience that I get very hungry, the rungaries kick in, and then I'm craving those more high calorie, high sugar, high fat foods. So think about just increasing those daily steps. And then if you are doing cardio, which is of course great for your health, do it because it makes you feel good. And then the area that I think is, even though it's like the bit I put at the end of the method, I think it's the one that holds all of the other things together along with the progress goals, because I do work with a lot of women who are navigating perimenopause, looking after family members who have just so much going on, and just piling on more pressure on top of that is one of the quickest ways to make this feel impossible. So a reset done properly should not be adding that pressure in that I have to do this way. If anything, it should help to reduce it because the decision's been made. So the decision fatigue decreases and the structure that you have in place does that heavy lifting for you. But there are going to be things that make fat loss feel much harder. And I think it's worth talking about that in this section. So stress is going to be one of them. Poor sleep is another. We know that when our sleep is disrupted, hunger increases and cravings get harder to manage. We know that when we're feeling overwhelmed, our adherence to pretty much everything tends to drop. So the habits that help you sleep better, that have you feeling calmer, don't become extras during this time. They become part of the plan. And if anything, I think they become the most important part of the plan. So I know that putting my phone on charge each evening is something that can really help me wind down. I also have a habit of doing one thing each evening to make tomorrow easier. And that might be getting that breakfast ready in advance, getting some clothes ready, thinking about what your kids are going to need in the morning. I'll talk about winning the morning, winning the day, but actually I think it starts the evening before. So for me, I know that if I wake up in the morning and there's nothing ready, it feels like we're starting in this panic. So think about in the evening, what can you do to make tomorrow easier? And then if that evening snacking that you've been experiencing is hunger based, then it might be that you're doing something that keeps your hands busy. Having busy hands helps calm our mind. It might be that you're folding washing, you're knitting, things like this that can help you calm your mind in the evening, but also help you not pick at the snacks as well. I sometimes wonder that if we as a group were to start knitting a scarf every time that we wanted to snack in the evening, how long would that scarf be? How good at knitting would we get? And another one that could fit into this area, and it's something I've been thinking about more this past week because of a book that I'm reading, is those moments to have in silence, to have that calm. We have stimulation, things going on around us all the time, and it often doesn't give us that opportunity to reflect. And so can you take that time just quietly, whether you're journaling, whether you're thinking of gratitude, but without your phone, without anyone talking to you or shouting at you to help them find things, whatever it is, but just that moment. I like each day thinking about what's gone well. I think measuring progress and reflecting throughout the reset is going to be hugely important. So each week, do take a bit of time to look at what's gone well, what's worked, what's felt harder than expected, and why that might be. Use those progress goals that you've set to think about this. What is going to make it easier going into next week? So learn from what is and isn't working. And I think that weekly reflection is going to help so much. Again, not as a reason to beat yourself up, not as a reason to feel like you're failing, but as helping you adjust rather than just pushing through and hoping that this week's going to be different than last week. The question is never going to be, why can't I do this? It's that felt harder than I expected, and what would make it easier. Even just that change in how we talk to ourselves can make a real difference to whether we keep going or not. And then, of course, because we want to stay in the game, we want to notice the wins along the way, not just at the very end, but every time you do what you said you'd do. Notice it, give yourself a little high five, be proud of it. Those are the types of things that build momentum. You can be proud. You can start to believe that you're someone who follows through. And over the 2 months, that is going to make such a difference. This is how I would encourage you to approach the reset, not in a perfect way, but with some clear focus. This isn't about white knuckling it through for 2 months, but it is about going, what slipped? How can I make that easier? Yes, bloody hell, Ruth, I'm committing to this. Because it's very hard to give up on the things that are making us feel good. If I think about running, there are times where I thought about giving up because I treated it as this punishing, awful thing. I'd go out too hard every time. I wouldn't recover. But once I flipped in my mind that I always was going to come back feeling better than I did when I went out, and I adjusted my running speed and so on whenever I do go out, it's really hard to give up on it now because it does make me feel good. And I think we can apply that to so many different areas. Think about how good you feel for the changes you're making. And that is going to be very hard to give up on. And for the next couple of months, aim for those optimals as much as you can and fall back on the minimums when you can't. They're there for a reason. They're not the goal. The optimums are the goal, the push goals, but reflect each week on what's working and what would make things easier, and notice how you're showing up. We're just aiming for more consistency here, that sharper intention. And of course, if you do want to do this with a community with support around you, then we would love to have you inside the app. We're starting on May, but we will be beginning thinking about what has and hasn't been working before it begins. And we'll be having bi-weekly calls through this challenge so that we can reflect on those progress goals every 2 weeks together. But I'll pop in the details in the show notes of the things that I've mentioned in this podcast, the method, the calorie range link. But as always, if this has resonated with you, please do leave a comment. I love hearing from you and I will reply to them. And make sure that you hit follow or subscribe or whatever it is on the platform you're listening to so that you don't miss the next one. It has been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. I will speak to you again very soon. Goodbye.